I'm Chanmi.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Michelle.
We all started teaching at the same school about 20 years ago.
20.
Well,
Michelle and I are still working at the same school. All of us have taught siblings of students. We're now teaching a lot of children of former students. That's scary.
Doesn't
Wait.
seem possible.
let me just say, yeah, exactly. The children of former students. And those kids are not in preschool. They're in like second grade. It's
Right.
sweet and not sweet at the same time.
Right. Like I said, it doesn't seem possible. And
Yeah.
I know that for the three of us, so some people do like a double take when we tell them we've been teaching for over 20 years. They're like, what? They don't believe it. Well, I have this great story I wanted to share with you about this experience that I had with my students my first year. I was able to have like a classroom with students that just loved writing, and I just let them choose what they wanted to write about, and they just ran with it, and they wrote books after books after books. And these are not fancy published things. This is before technology, so they just took pieces of 8.5 and 11 by sheets of white paper when they published their stories with a colored sheet on top. And they would afterwards we would celebrate their writing, and they would get to put their books in a book basket in our classroom library. And I just remember all the giggles and the laughs that we had when the featured students would sit and be able to sit in the author's chair and share their stories. And it was just such a fun time, and the students just we just all I can think of it with such a big smile, even though it was a memory from 20 years ago.
I love how all the stories came from the students. They were from them. It's their lives. It's them.
It's personal.
It is. It's their identity. It's who they are. This is really interesting that you bring this up. I've meant to talk to you about this for years, but I think some of those student stories are still floating around the school to this day.
That brings us to our segment, Tell Me Another Story.
We hear from our pre-service classes before we enter our first teaching class that building a positive classroom community is important. But why? And why would it be worth our time?
I think that if we define that it helps us understand the challenges of what our students are going through and what's on their mind. But what does that mean, even a positive classroom community? Does that just mean people are all getting along? What does that mean?
Right. Well,
yeah.
Students need to feel a sense of ownership.
I think students also need to trust each other and their teacher.
Mm-hmm.
They should also be able to build their confidence and be able to embrace challenges, ask questions, even take risks.
You know what that all says to me? Like when the ownership is the students are very engaged in the learning. They're driving the learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. That sounds like I can say that, but how do you do it? How does that work?
Yeah.
It took
Not
me
so
a
easy
long
to do.
time. Right. It took me a long time to figure out how to do that. And I kept trying things, and some things were great and some things I didn't ever try again. But what do you do? How do you create this sense of community within the classroom so that students feel a sense of ownership of their learning, and they feel a safe space, and they trust each other and they trust the teacher? They can take risks and make mistakes. How do you do that?
I think it starts with developing relationships. You have to build the relationship with them first. Content, academics, we know all of that. We know what we have to teach, but you need to be able to motivate them, to get them engaged. They need to trust us, and they need to trust each other. So you've got to build that relationship from the start.
So that's where that sharing stories, because I think it helps people understand that even though we're all different, we're all alike in the end.
Right. They need to connect with each other. That's what it is. We're people. We need to.
That's the power of stories. There are those little bridges that can connect one of us to another. And I came across some when I was reading about trust and building positive community. And this research shows that if that trusting teachers determines whether the students will even approach you, even ask you for information. And not only that, like believe what you will tell them. And then it also has an effect on how they'll remember it later. That's just the power of trust. It's kind of amazing.
Totally makes sense.
It does. It does. So it's intentional. It's deliberate. How do you get there? Like, I know for me, it's in, I purposefully foster these conversations through my planning. When I plan the lessons, I am intentionally thinking about the questions that I'm asking and how am I going to get the students to ask certain kinds of questions. It's in the materials that I choose. So, how does that work for you?
I agree. I think a big part of it is really listening to your students at the very beginning. What are they interested in? What are their strengths? And taking all of that into consideration when you're planning, thinking about their backgrounds, when you're choosing the text and the resources, what these students are able to do and to give you, and really listening to them.
And I think also, as you're saying that, it's like, where do I want them to end? What is the learning goal? So, within this building community and storytelling, there's all kinds of academic benefits that the students can gain from that. That would be the learning goal and the academic piece that matches the standards and all that. But within that, you're building this positive community, and the kids are gaining a sense of trust and really loving the situation.
And I think in terms of the storytelling is that it comes back to just allowing the students' voices to be heard and giving them numerous platforms, whether it's just, organic, natural conversations that you have with them, where it's just during transition times or before school, before the day really starts. But when they're ready to share what they've learned, and they're, after they've done their projects and their researches, and giving them just different platforms to say, like, every voice is important, every voice, every idea is important and valuable, and that we can all learn from them. And they don't, and what you had said earlier, Michelle, about them being, like celebrating the things that are similar, but really being proud of the differences and the different way we came up with a solution. I think that's part of that storytelling too, where we approach things and our perspectives are just as important. And if they're different, that's all the better, because we're learning a new way of thinking.
Right.
Well, and I think that's building the relationships within the classroom, to be able to trust each other. And they know, if there are differences, hey, and I have a different perspective, that's accepted here.
So I think the lesson here is that when students feel valued and respected, they'll learn to trust you, and they'll learn to trust each other. They have to believe that the teacher, that we're invested in them. Mm-hmm. And so that'll motivate them to want to learn, and it'll definitely give them the confidence to take on the challenges in the classroom.
For sure. Yes. Do you have a goodie for us today? Strategies that get the W?
I do. So when I thought of our goodie today, I was thinking, since it's about storytelling, I was thinking about John Hattie and Robert Marzano, these big gurus in education.
Yes.
One of the things that they had said is one of the effective strategies in the classroom is cooperative learning groups. So I realized early on in my teaching that when I asked my students to, when they were in groups and they had to communicate and collaborate on their ideas, that they did not know how to do that. So I had to teach them explicitly how to have those structured conversations. And so one of the strategy today is about conversation starters and using sentence frames to teach students how to have those conversations.
Oh, right. I know I have materials in my classroom that has a list of ways to start a sentence, whether you're writing or speaking. Right. Do you have that, Jennifer?
I do. I have cards on the table, conversation cards for the kids that they can access when they need
them. So it'd say like, please help me understand, or how do you know, ... Like the
I agree with you because, can you tell me more about what you were thinking?
Right. So have that metacognitive evidence-based thinking and make that very clear.